Greetings. My name is Vino Mapetile, and I've just taken some time out to do this short recording. It's meant to assist CAA APT students in their preparatory program for the ICAZ APC examinations. Now, the outcomes from this session is about solution planning, and the learning outcomes are: is there a relationship between the task that you've been given, the scenario, which is your information on the day, and the pre-release information? Are those things linked in any way to the suggested solution in terms of relative correlation? Can you see a solution within a task and a scenario? That's the first question that we want to tackle and see if answering that question can help us in terms of our approach to the assessment. Then the second thing that we would like to check is solution planning a function of deep understanding of the knowledge area that you want to answer in the examination, or is it more about the ability to critically analyze a task? And let's have a look at that question and see whether it will then contribute to our approach. And lastly, should you really jot down a solution plan, or all you need to do is just read the task and plan, yes, but not necessarily jot down. So there's so many ways of doing it. This session is by no means a prescriptive session to say this is the approach someone must take, but answering these questions, we hope that by trying to answer these questions, you as a candidate will be able to reflect on what could work for you and how better you can prepare for the examination. Okay, so let's start with the question: is there a relationship between the task, the scenario, and the suggested solution? So my first consideration is, can a solution plan be traced back to information in the scenario and task? So in other words, if I do a solution plan and pick out a solution plan, if I look at the components of the things that I plan to write in my solution, can I go and pick them out directly in the solution, or the things in my solution plan have a lot more to do with things that I studied? In other words, I'm going to have to look for that in literature or in resources around the topic at hand. Now, my view is your solution plan, not the detailed content, but just to say, I'm going to cover this, I'm going to cover that, here are the issues, must be traceable back to the information in the scenario and the task, particularly in the task. The task scopes a lot of things in and out of a solution. It tells you who the taxpayer is. It should tell you what you must do. Are you discussing? Are you reviewing? Are you writing an email? The task is instructive. So when I'm doing a solution plan, I then take that instruction and say, I have been asked to do an email. So my solution plan says email. My solution plan says income tax and VAT implications. As I plan the solution, I am basing that plan on the information in the scenario and the task. So for me, so far, we're saying there should be a highly positive correlation between the task and the suggested solution. The next question in considering that is, does the solution lie in the scenario and task? My apologies, I wrote sicario there, and sicario means something completely different, something Mexican about gun-toting people. But anyway, I think yes. When you're trying to come up with a solution to any problem, the issue there is not for you to demonstrate that you've studied a certain program. What you want to do instead is to demonstrate that you are solving the problem at hand. So half of the solution, in terms of structure, in terms of what content I'm going to include, in terms of depth, in terms of coverage, in terms of a lot of things, lies within the scenario and the task. This is a departure from what we've used to, where students are heavily dependent on what they studied. Let's just use an audit example. You may have studied client acceptance procedures or general procedures in terms of your audit process of vouching. And I remember during the days, I would know how many of them I studied. I would know there are 10 general procedures when I'm trying to do substantive procedures. And I would memorize all 10. And I wouldn't care what's in the scenario, what the context is, or what the task is. The moment I sense, not even read, but sense that substantive procedures may be required, I'm pumping in those 10. That is completely opposite to this consideration. This consideration says, does the solution lie in the scenario and the task? And the answer for me is yes. It does not lie in the 10 substantive procedures that I've memorized. It lies in, okay, today these procedures have already been done. Can you review what has been done? So I cannot be there to regurgitate what I know. I'm just going to be restricted to what was done. Maybe only 2 out of those 10 were done. And those 2 were either done well, were they either done on the extreme side very well, or in the other extreme, they were done very badly, or in between. And if I am reviewing, especially the in-betweeners, I'm going to be saying this was done well, this was not done quite well. All these things in terms of the solution there are lying in the scenario and the task, and not in terms of my knowledge base. My last consideration on whether there's a relationship between the scenario, task, and the suggested solution is, what skills should you therefore sharpen when you want to do a good solution plan? Some of them are, 1, at PRI stage, when the pre-release comes, you need to know what will help you when it comes to solution planning on the day. Some of the things are clarity on what to use a file for. The problem with a file sometimes, a file is something that you must do, right? So we're not downplaying the need for a file. We're only saying now that the file is there, you've done it correctly, you saw your triggers, and you've done very well to prepare for this. You have to be very careful not to then be working from the file into a solution which suits what's in your file. It's the other way around. You're working from a task and a scenario, and you're saying one of the resources, not necessarily everything should come out of your file, is the file. Where you don't need it, you will not use it, which is obviously highly unlikely if you prepared well. So that's very important. That clear distinction that I'm not supposed to force things that are in my file. A file is only supplementary or complementary information, which, if preparation was done well, is going to be very, very useful. The other thing that happens at PRI stage that you need to be considering is your awareness in terms of hard coding preparatory work. So you've been in discussions and you've built up a file and so on and so on. And hard coding, I mean, now you cannot depart from what you learned. Because remember, on the day, certain tweaks will be made, certain emerging information, which is what happens in real life. You may have prepared for, let's just say, an annual, you may have prepared for 2025 as a plan. So you've got the budgets, you've got a solid plan. Then emerging information comes through, and your ability to pivot and use what's in the scenario and in the task to guide you in terms of, therefore, what is my expected output. Same way in real life, you are supposed to then be able to pivot given the emerging realities. Next year, would like to focus on the product, and then a competitor comes through and they shave off maybe 30% of your top line. You now have two things that you need to deal with there. You are now dealing with your revenue elements, and you're also dealing with your product strategy. So on the day, what will help with in solution planning? Confidence. Confidence that if I pick something that is in the task and in the scenario, I must be able to deal with it, regardless of whether my peers, when we did the group discussion, did or did not deal with it. Trust yourself. Trust your ability to be reasonable, to say, I'm picking out 1, 2, 3, 4 things in the scenario and on information on the day, and I trust my common sense to put 2 and 2 to give 4. Should never give 5 unless it's in a different base. And then problem solving as opposed to regurgitation. You must always on the day be bringing your thinking hat and saying, I'm going to be approaching the task from a problem solving perspective rather than from what can I write to get as many marks, which is why APC doesn't have marks, by the way. Okay, moving on. Is solution planning a function of deep understanding of the knowledge area, or is it an ability to critically analyze the task? So let's start with deep understanding of knowledge area. This is the beaten track, and by that I mean that's what we've been doing since, I don't know, maybe A-level. For A-level students, let's just take a MAF area of costing, or ABC. We probably learned that in A-level for those that did accounting or any of the commercial subjects that would then put there. You probably did compounding and discounting in mathematics. That could even have been done at O-level, and then at even advanced level for the Zimbabwean students. You could have even done it at degree level. And then now you did it at CTA, you did it at ITC, and here you are at APC. And the student continues to say, I will only be able to solve the task if I go and master the compounding and discounting, the ABC, all those techniques. So that's the beaten track. That's how we have always been doing it. 2 days before an exam, I go and immerse myself into techniques and tools and try and make sure if they're asked, I'm able to bring out all those tools. So it always seems the way when you're preparing for an exam. Here you need to be careful to change that mindset. That's why you're given 5 days ahead to brush up on all the technical areas, because clearly what we have, the thrust of the examination there is for you not to regurgitate. So we're looking at the effectiveness of your induction. Remember, when some of these things are mentioned at induction, feedback that we get from this class is that we couldn't really understand what you're talking about. So now that you are writing one of your important assessments, you need to have this whole story about, am I here largely preparing by maximizing or trying to refresh and making sure I have deep technical understanding of the knowledge area that could be examinable. Or maybe solution planning is more to do with critical analysis, your ability to break things down into components, assessing these components and rebuilding them in the form of a solution. So the question is, which one of these two is the skill that is required for you to plan a solution effectively? You still need understanding of the technical area. You still need critical analysis. But for the purposes of doing a solution plan where you haven't started writing, my view is the skill that you need, which is a very abstract concept, is critical analysis. Your ability to break it down. This task is asking me to discuss tax implications. Which ones? VAT and income tax. You're already breaking it down into components. So by the time you're doing a solution plan, you're saying, in my solution plan, I would like to see a discussion. That's number one. In my solution plan, I want to see for every transaction, VAT, income tax. In my solution plan, and. So that's what the question was about. Which of the two? And now we're saying students tend to downplay this whole critical analysis because they're thinking, what am I studying there? I really want to get into the big timber issues and get into section 15 as read with the third schedule, and also it touches on and it links to interpretation. And then you want to do this deep technical dive, which is still important, but missing the summary issues in terms of maybe you're diving too deep into one area when you should have covered 5. Maybe you're diving too shallow into so many unnecessary areas when you should have done a deep dive into one. And that's caused by the inability to critically analyze before you begin to answer. So what skill is more important in coming up with a solution plan? Is it deep dive into knowledge area, which you do prior to the exam in the PRI period? So that's why I've asked the question, how does this conversation help in your PRI period? How does it help on the day? And which of the two should you use and why? So moving on, should you jot down a solution plan? For me, consider a lot of things. Number one, candidates sometimes say, I don't have the time. Don't you? So when you look at the 8 hours or so that you're writing the exam, the question is, how much of your time should be used to step back, plan your work, and then execute? And this is what happens in real life as well. You cannot afford to send out a solution to a problem that is half-baked because you didn't stop to plan it. Consider how volatile your memory can be. So you see, when you read and then you look at the task, when you start writing, you're thinking, I know my stuff, I will make sure I'll remember to put in everything. But your memory can be very volatile because as you're writing, you're thinking of new things, and it's random access memory. It can be overwritten by new information, and suddenly, before you know it, you forget to write. And then after the exam, you're thinking, but I forgot to write 1, 2, 3, and yet I had thought about it. Right, and it's a sinking feeling when you always remember post when the horse has already bolted. Then consider progressive fatigue. As you are writing, you start tiring, and do it with the law of diminishing returns, which is in economics that says, so you've got soil that you've planted a plant, and you need fertilizer to increase the yield. The more fertilizer you put initially, the more yield you get. But the more and more you start pumping in there, it actually becomes toxic. So your mind can only produce good results, but progressively as you fatigue, your returns become diminishing. So sometimes what you need to do is to have done the plan, right, and jotted it down. As you start diminishing, the plan revitalizes you. It makes you remember the things that you need to write. And then consider the bias by the preparatory work you have done in the PRI period, and the confirmation bias on the day. So the bias here is you studied something. Definitely because it was triggered, it then comes through in the examination. But it's the angle and the detail which you studied it, that you tend to be biased to want to present it in that manner. Instead of using what you studied, maybe you're thinking you're going to be questioned in a certain manner, but either way, because the question has come in a different manner, you can still use that knowledge. So don't be biased to do it in the way you did it during PRI, in anticipation of a certain question. But you can, and you're supposed to anticipate it helps you study to say, what if it's asked like this? It's still good to do that. But on the day, you cannot afford to have any biases. Sometimes I remember I was in a group that had sharpshooters, people who were very good at ITC. And when I get into the exam, I tend to gravitate to say, so-and-so was saying this in the group, and they are bright. Who am I to make my own independent considerations given the new information on the day that is before me, and also given the task that was not the one that we used at the time we were doing the discussions. So that bias, you have to be aware of it. And then what I'm saying by confirmation bias on the day, what tends to happen is you see any words on the day that sort of confirm what you studied. You tend to pump in what you studied indiscriminately because you are triggered by certain keywords that confirm that that's what I studied. So this one is a very important. I'm told in the aviation industry, this is one of the things that pilots learn. I'm not a pilot, but I will use the example anyway. They say if a plane is flying maybe at 30,000 feet or somewhere high up there, it's got a number of minutes before where it develops a technical problem and it's falling out of the sky. It doesn't happen within seconds. It happens for quite a number of minutes as it loses altitude. Now, the issue there becomes the pilot must be careful in how he or she uses their few minutes, maybe it's 15 minutes before impact or before it comes to an altitude in which it cannot be saved. And why should they be careful? If what comes to mind first as the possible problem tends to give you bias, confirmation bias, in the sense that when you begin to do the diagnosis using the instrumentation panel, you looking at what the plane is doing, maybe listening to sounds. So for example, maybe let's just say there's a big bang at the back and the pilot assumes that the rear door is opened, right? The next things that happen, let's assume it can cause instability, maybe turbulence of some sort. All the things that then begin to happen after that, because the pilot has already suspected that it could be the door that is opened. Anything that is an effect of a door opening mid-air that then happens, even if that symptom can happen with another problem, or the pilot may tend to look for signs to confirm their initial thoughts rather to look for signs that can help them make a proper diagnosis. So that's what confirmation bias is. It's always about confirming what your initial thoughts are. By the time he realizes, no, it's actually, the Big Bang was actually caused by a bomb or an engine that is just blown out. Sometimes they've already lost too much time trying to just confirm what they initially wanted. So what you have studied can cause confirmation bias when you are reading things on the day and on the, so you need to be able to be very good at your diagnosis, and you should not be biased towards something that you studied. Then consider completeness and balance. If you don't do the solution plan, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes your solution doesn't tend to be balanced. You go deep dive in one of the concepts that you probably are very familiar with and saw at the beginning, and then by the time you start tiring out, your solution becomes unbalanced because you haven't really said where are the marks, where are the, not marks, but where's the value, what is the solution supposed to be looking like a balanced solution. And then consideration of the depth and the audience. Some of these things get lost if you hadn't planned properly, because you're just winging it or coming up with a solution on the fly, and therefore you lose balance. Thank you very much. 25 minutes, but I hope it will be useful to you.